alright. Riding around in the breeze, well, it's alright. If you live the life you please, well, it's alright. Doing the best you can, well.
From Alameda, California, the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network presents Flying High Over the Zone with the Zigzag Man.
I am back, and you are flying high with me, the Zigzag Man, over the zone from Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, and we're down by the lagoon in Alameda. And if you've ever been to Alameda, California, there is a pungent smell that runs through the city on occasion, not all the time, but when the wind is blowing, and that's the smell from the man-made lagoon. And I'm the kind of guy who thinks of that as a blessing, because that smell is no doubt covering up some other smell that's probably worse. That's the way I look at life, and that's pretty much my philosophy. It could be worse, so stop complaining, everybody. We could have had a bad well, no, we couldn't be much worse than this. Okay, let's get on with it. I have a returning guest. His MO is sports. He's an attorney. He's one of the most interesting guys I've ever met, and I had him on last week, and between having him on and introducing him for the second time, we've agreed that Ian Kahanowitz is going to join Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and he's going to have his own show, his own podcast show, and it's called Genesis, and here he is to tell you a little bit about that. And we're going to talk some Thai Cobb, because I try to learn a little bit every day of my life, and Ian is going to tell me some of the things that I don't know about one of the greatest baseball players and arguably one of the not-so-great human beings that ever lived, Thai Cobb. So take it away, Ian. What do you hear? What do you say?
Hey, what's going on, Zigzag Man? How's it out there in Alameda?
Well, it's a little cold and crisp. It's like in the 50s. So I say that with no complaint, because I know how the rest of the country is experiencing their winters. We've had somewhat of a cold one, a nasty one. But, again, no complaints, because our summers are basically 70 degrees average all year round. So how can you complain about that? And we overlook San Francisco without having the cold of San Francisco. And I'm about 20 minutes away on a bus. I could be in San Francisco. Alameda's a wonderful little community with its growing problems and the problems of life, social problems of life that we're all going through in wherever we live, big cities, small cities, rural, urban, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of bad changes going on, and these are hectic times. But again, let's talk about positive things. What do you plan on your podcast? I know you've done this before, and this is going to be kind of a renewal of what you've been doing. Tell me what you did and what you have planned to do.
Well, on my show Genesis, way back in 2014, 2015, and early 2016, basically, I got those websites I told you about on the last show, the Dugout and the Tigers and the Yankees and the Thai Cobb and the historical Negro Leagues. And so famous people come there and authors come there. And so what I try to do on my podcast was exactly what I tried to do on my websites and my pages on Facebook, and that is to teach, and to teach the truth. And one of the fellows I met on the website was Charles Learson, whose book, Cobb, A Terrible Beauty, was published last year around this time. He was the first, actually 2015, he was the first guy on my show. And, he did extensive research, and he brought out the truth about Cobb, which I told him he'd win an award, which he did. He won the Sabre Book of the Year award, a couple of other awards. And I told him, being a historian, being a lawyer, that when it comes to the future, when anyone will ask about Cobb, they're going to use your book as referenced because you got it right. Al Stump didn't get it right. And we'll go into that after. But my show, it was pretty much like a variety show. It was a cross between, I'd say, Larry King and Charlie Rose. I'd sit and cross-examine and ask questions about a person's book and the type of research they did, why they wanted to do their subject, what they found out new about their subject. Something that all of us could learn, that we don't have to sit down and read a newspaper. We don't have to read a book to get the full details. You're getting instant lessons right then, instant gratification, and you can move on.
Beautiful. Wow, what a privilege it is for me to add your show to my already really fine network. I'm not... I can't be modest about this. I built a group of folks who work together and are mavens and teachers themselves and authors themselves and super fans with super curiosity and interest. And you fit right in. So
it's a privilege
I'm really
to be here.
This has been a good week for me.
Every week's a good week. I'd always say, you know what, Ralph, this is something that the mantra could be. When I was a young kid and I was starting out as an attorney, and I used to be so bitter. I owed a law school loan, and things weren't going my way. And I was, 24, 25. And I used to be so bitter going into work. And this guy, he was around my age now. He was around 50. He goes, Ian, I don't know why you're walking around. You don't have kids. You're not married. And he said to me this, and he said, I always want you to remember this. No matter what you're going through, whether you're sick or not, every day above ground is a good day.
That's good philosophy. Every day above ground says it all. Because could be a lot worse. And so let's get into Cobb a little bit. You mentioned, I'm going to put this with the interview that we did last week, and so there's some continuity, and people could look back what we talked about last week, and I'm going to edit it in. It's going to be an episode that I'm going to post later on today. And what I asked you, we talked mostly about Ted Williams, and I learned some fascinating stuff. We had a very enjoyable interview and very informative interview. And we barely touched on Cobb. And I mentioned that when I was a kid, I read Al Stump's book. And it was incredibly interesting. He had developed a close relationship with Cobb. And he didn't necessarily put the man in the most flattering of lights. Cobb had a lot of demons and a lot of craziness going on in his head. So for years, all I knew about Cobb, basically, was what I did read in Al Stump, and by Al Stump. And now you're bringing to light some research that was done, a book. Who was the gentleman that wrote the book again on the Sabre book?
Charles Learson. That's Leerhsen. He's in my Cobb group, which you're a part of. He's part of my friends. On Facebook, you just mention my name, and he'll just entertain whatever question you have about Ty Cobb.
All right. Now, from your knowledge that you gleaned from him, what are some of the things in the Al Stump book that deserve a second look?
Well, I think most of it does, because I'll tell you, Stump had 2 books on Ty Cobb. Yes, he did follow Ty Cobb in Cobb's last years in the late 50s. Cobb would die in 61, but Cobb read briefly, the manuscript before it was sent to the publisher, and he didn't like it. He said there was a lot of things that were wrong with it. Some of it were half-truths. Some of it was stretched by Stump to fabricate things so that the book would sell, and it did. And so when, Ty Cobb died, he had no voice to say otherwise. Stump recreated the book in 1994. He published another biography on Cobb, which was made into the movie with Tommy Lee Jones, if you can recall that, Ralph, back in 94.
I do.
But, again, the movie was based on Stump's book. Stump labeled Cobb as a very mean person, that he tried to rape a girl, that he killed someone, he was this disgusting human being, and he got into the Hall of Fame, and he didn't even take the picture with the first class because he just wasn't present there, and he didn't want to be there, and people bought it. And even I bought it. I used to go around saying, well, everyone on steroids here, it's fine. They broke the law. But you know what? So did Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth drank during Prohibition. They didn't bar him from baseball. And Ty Cobb killed a guy, which I learned later on wasn't true. But that's the kind of person Al Stump painted. A portrait of a great baseball player, and he tarnished his image.
How do you think his image would have been tarnished with or without Stump?
Without Stump, I think Ty Cobb's story is something that everyone should read. Because when Ty Cobb entered into baseball in the 1905 season, you take away the television, take away the balls that are played now. He played in what was called the dead ball era. And the dead ball era was the circus for what, people didn't have TVs, people didn't have radios, people didn't have the internet. So what did you used to do?
Town baseball was a big part of life.
Right, and so you go to a game, or you go to the circus, or you get live acts. In some parts of the country, vaudeville, Abbott and Costello and the Three Stooges came out, traveling circuses, traveling shows. Baseball had a lot of those people in the game at the time. A lot of carnies, a lot of laborers who rather play ball rather than go back to factories. They were hard-nosed human beings that came from a tough life. Now, be that as it may, you're talking about a Southerner who was born in Georgia, and he now goes to a northern team in Detroit.
Michigan.
Right in Michigan. So the Civil War is still fresh in people's minds after 40 years. It's almost like now with Vietnam, the end of Vietnam, everyone talks about 75. So the Civil War was still fresh in people's minds. You still had a court case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which was in 1896, done by the Supreme Court, which established, a white society and a black society, the African-American society, because they said separate and equal. And it all came from an African-American trying to ride in a white booth on a Pullman train. And the Supreme Court said every facet of life can be equal. And as we know, it wasn't equal. But it fused tensions between the North and the South. And now you're having someone from Georgia playing in a Northern team with all that stereotype. And it was farther from the truth. Because when Mr. Learson puts out his book, Tykop's father was a teacher. He was very, very bright. And his ancestry can be traced to those who were abolitionists, those who did not want slavery, who thought African Americans were equal. So that whole stigma of Ty Cobb being a racist was wrong. Now, in Al Stump's book, he says he went into the crowd and he beat up an African American man. That's true. The guy was heckling him. Now, in those days, if anyone heckled somebody on the field, it was proper for a player to go in there and slug him.
Didn't know that.
You go in and slug him. Games back then, it was like a parade, Ralph. People would stop in the middle of the inning, say Cobb got a triple. They would bring him food on third base. Or, it wasn't like it's all closed off now and all this. People used to go onto the field to shake hands with the players and tell them how great they were, bring them gifts and stuff. So everything was like, accessible. It was like, it wasn't one-dimensional where you sit in the stands, you have your popcorn or your beer or whatever, you root for your team and then you go home. It wasn't like that. And so Cobb played in an era where you had to be tough to play the ball because baseball was very dirty at the time. And, one instance, I'll give you an instance, is John McGraw, who coached the New York Giants for about 30 years. When he was a player in the 1890s, if somebody hit the ball and they were running around the base, he would stick out his leg. He would grab them by the belt to try to hold them up so he could be tagged out at second base. There were death threats, and gamblers got involved with it right from the beginning, which is why the 1919 White Sox, were guilty. It was proven, but so many more World Series before that were thrown. And even the great players like Cobb and Trespiker, Walter Johnson, they all were paid off either to throw the ball flat or left or give away signals so that they could be paid rewards. It was a different type of era.
Right. Not like in, say, 1951 when the Giants were stealing signs and passing them on. Pretty much in the same way.
But let me tell you
still a renegade sport in a lot of ways. What were you going to say?
It was brutal. An umpire, he could lose his life by calling a strike and ending a team's run that year. They used to chase umpires into the street with like knives and stuff, trying to kill them. There was that, and then back then they only had 2 umpires, and then they moved it to 4. The dead ball era changed the way baseball was played. Baseball, at the time and in the dead ball, the reason why they call it the dead ball era is think of if they had one ball throughout the whole game. The ball gets muddied, it gets crapped up, it gets, doctored, the flaps are coming off, the rawhide's coming off, and that is why they called it the dead ball, because no one could hit a home run. So you played the game differently. And how you played the game is you bunted. You had a different stroke. You didn't have a stroke like Babe Ruth. You had a stroke like Ty Cobb, who was literally throwing the bat at the ball so that he can pick his directional to hit it in between the infielders into the outfield. Now
even in the dead ball era, there were players with more power than other players of their era. Am I correct?
You are, but they didn't hit 20.
Was Ty Cobb known as being, not, obviously he wasn't known as a power hitter, but compared to the other players, did he have as much or more power?
He didn't, and I'll tell you why. Because he didn't hit for power. He wasn't trained to hit for power. I think Home Run Baker, who was the big home run hitter at the time period, he hit, I think, 8 home runs in one season. That was considered a lot. Whereas Ty Cobb was trying for a single that he would turn into a double because he was that lightning fast. Now, one of the rumors and one of the things Al Stump said was that when Ty Cobb circled the bases and when he slid into you, he had his spikes sharpened, ready to dig his spikes into a third baseman or a second baseman and hurt him. And that's farthest from the truth. The new material that has come out shows Ty Cobb sliding with his legs down and his spikes down, not to hurt people, and sliding away. These were fabrications that Stump and another author wrote about that the public picked up on, but didn't do their research to make sure they were fact-checking. The publishers were guilty of that because all the newspaper articles back then, and I'll give you an instance. In the first season that Ty Cobb started, his mother heard rumblings outside. She thought it was an intruder, and she shot the guy and killed him, and it ended up being her husband, Ty Cobb's dad.
That gets a lot of bad press.
And, Stump said there was a shotgun and all this other stuff, but it wasn't. It ended up being a pistol because Charles Learson went back and looked at the police reports. And there was a whole trial. Yeah, there was a whole trial. They tried his mother for murder, and she was acquitted. But this all happened at a time when Ty Cobb was 19 years old. A Southerner that went up to Michigan to play in Detroit that was hazed like everybody else. But with him, it was worse because they thought he was some dumb hick from Georgia.
Right. Intelligence-wise, he accumulated a lot of bucks in his life. I think he owned Coca-Cola stock.
He did.
And was that it that made him really rich? If I remember correctly, he had the foresight to not only invest his money, but what to invest it in. It's a two-step process. Yogi Berra had the skill. Mickey Mantle didn't have the skill. And Ralph Tyko didn't have the skill. Ian Kahanowitz probably had the skill. I don't know, but
I had the skill. You invest in what's in proportion today. Now, in that day, what was big? Coca-Cola was 20 years old. Stock was brimming because we were just getting out of a recession from the 1890s. There was like the super recession. It could have been labeled a depression. It wasn't as steep as the one 10 years ago, but a lot of people lost their jobs. And then, you had Teddy Roosevelt in office, who was making all of these hits on labor. And so companies like Standard Oil and, Coca-Cola and
U.S. Steel, for instance.
U.S. Steel. They were growing by leaps and bounds. And Cobb was smart enough to invest his money that rather than go out like most of these guys did and blow it on drinks like Mantle did. It was even more prevalent in the day of the dead ball era. Life was harder, and people needed an escape from their lives.
Well,
but Cobb didn't do that.
Mickey never bought a drink, but he simply didn't. He had a lot of bad investments. He had bowling alleys go bad and pool halls and this, that, and the other thing, whereas Yogi had Yoo-Hoo, and is much the same concept as what I think about with Cobb. It just took off and went great guns. What was he really like? Was he, if not this Southern? I think I read it to you or read it on the air with you last week. a quote by Chris Speaker that said Ty Cobb is still fighting the Civil War, and to him, we're all a bunch of damn Yankees. So is that far from the truth? And does what he was like, is that somewhere in between a respectable businessman who was fairly bright and what's been portrayed?
Well, if you remember, Tris Speaker was on the Indians, I believe, and Cobb was on the Tigers, and there was some kind of scandal that was going on where both of them were being pointed at. Some kind of throwing of the games that both of them did. They both ended up on the 1928 Philadelphia Athletics, if you recall.
Together, playing together. Wow.
Yeah. Right. So was Ty Cobb fighting the Civil War? No. Was he painted into a corner because he was a Southerner? Yes. Did he take pictures with Jackie Robinson? Yes. Did he take pictures with Hank Aaron 4 years before he died? Yes, I have them. Was he showing Hank Aaron where to hit the ball? Yes, he was.
I know that picture. Hank is sitting there with a look on his face of absolute awe and just engrossed in this man. There are a lot of pictures of him going in today's game, in the game in the 50s before he passed away. Now, Hornsby, on the other hand, was not a good manager, not a good coach, not a good teacher, really kind of an asshole.
Well, he was. He was. He was a product of his time.
Yeah, Hornsby was.
He was Hornsby. He was probably, they labeled him the Flying Dutchman. He was a great baseball player, but he didn't have the patience to be a coach. He didn't have the patience to teach. He thought it was a natural thing you're born with.
Cobb seemed to have a better communique with human beings. So, notwithstanding his personal beliefs, which really nobody knows what's inside of a man's head, there's anecdotal tales and stories and this and that, but Cobb seemed to be better with people than Hornsby. Let's just put it that way.
Cobb was, and I got a lot of pictures. If you saw the one the other day, he was leaning on Walter Johnson's shoulder. I posted a picture in the Ty Cobb. He played golf for many years after his baseball career with Tris Speaker, Babe Ruth. I got a picture of them going across the green, arm in arm. What people he had his own children, Cobb. And some of that's been fictionalized. He was an absentee parent for obvious reasons. He was on the road and stuff like that. But I think he became alienated from his children only because of what America perceived what a ball player needed to do. Like Babe Ruth, he was never home. He was never home for his daughter. But like Ruth, he loved children. And I got many pictures, and I got much proof that he felt bad for those who had cancer, whose kids who had braces from polio. I had a picture I once put up. Cobb bringing signature signed balls to them. He always took time to sign balls in the stands for kids. He knew he played a kids game, and he knew he got paid for it. And I think it was a lot of personalized demons that he was going through at the time. We can't put our finger on it, but during the trial of his mother, during the hazing of his first season in Detroit, Cobb might have had a nervous breakdown because he disappeared for 44 days. And nothing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he disappeared for 44 days. Nothing's really written of it, but he had to leave the team, and he was engaged at the time, and his wife doesn't leave any letters or clues where he was. I believe that he went to get his head cleared. You're a 19-year-old kid. You're getting chastised by your own teammates, and now your mother's on trial for killing your father. And a lot of people are like, well, history has not been kind to Ty Cobb. But I think overall, as a human being, he wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the monster that Al Stump painted him as.
Right. From a ball player's standpoint, he was absolutely the best. I mean, he and Ruth, in their different ways, were clearly the two best players of their era. And actually, it's two eras, because Ruth wasn't in the dead ball era.
He came up later.
Came up later and transcended the era. And am I right when we look back? He and Cobb, Ruth and Cobb, Cobb and Ruth, two greatest of their time.
I will say this. Ty Cobb was the first superstar of baseball. There was no one preceding him. You got stars, you had stars, but again, in a world...
Cap Anson and a few others.
Cap Anson. Yeah, and Cap Anson a decade before him in the 1890s and stuff like that.
And Tris Speaker was pretty good himself. He wasn't Ty Cobb, but by all reports, he was probably a better center fielder defensively. That's what how I remember history. But Cobb would beat you he was like Willie in a lot of ways, that they find 30 different ways to beat you in the game. Intangibles.
And at the time, like I said, baseball was a different game. You had to strategize differently. Whereas Babe Ruth played in an era where the long ball, was prevalent. He had 60 home runs in 27, 59 the year before, and balls flew out of the park. You had a ball that looked like a head of cabbage, and you had to improvise. And anyone who spent most of their time in the dead ball era, I mean, he spent 17 years in the dead ball era, Ty Cobb, and he had a lifetime batting average of 366.
Whoa.
You had
thinking
a
about
lifetime.
that. 20 points higher than Williams.
He had 344 Williams, and he played in an era where it was a lot different. The ball.
Travel conditions, uniforms, the fields, the state of the field itself, different times.
It was.
Any one thing that if you had mentioning passing all of our knowledge, your knowledge in this case, on, any one thing about Cobb that you'd pass on that you'd want people to remember that wasn't portrayed accurately by Stump in particular? One thing that stands out in your head.
Well, there's a few things that stand out in my head. One of them was that his family, I mentioned before, his family was a bunch of abolitionists, and he didn't grow up this racist, evil person that Stump painted at. What I think was, what people should know about Cobb is perseverance. Cobb was a so complex individual, and he held most of it in. But the odds were stacked against him when he first came up. And as baseball progressed through cheating and gambling and sometimes his teammates not even playing as hard as they should, Cobb always was a figure in the game that would not let up. He persevered. He gave it 110%. Baseball to him was life. To be on that field, to start running when he hits the ball, to think about where he's going to hit the ball, how to slide, where to slide, when to slide, how to play the field. He was always thinking a lot like Ted Williams, except Ted Williams wasn't so much with the fielding as much was hitting. He was strategizing in a time when pitchers could throw a spitball and it was legal. It was legal until 1920. When a ball, a catcher catches a pitch and then rubs it in the dirt and throws it back to the pitcher, and then Cobb would have to readjust knowing that there's dirt on the ball.
Right.
That would be very difficult these days to do. And when you have mud, excuse me, when you have mud on the ball, when you have spit on the ball aerodynamically is not doing what it's supposed to do. The pitcher has the advantage.
Right.
It can make the ball turn and curve in ways you can never have. Cy Young won 514 games, 513 games. Walter Johnson, he had the most shutouts out of anyone. I think it was something like 300 shutouts out of his 440 victories. And strikeouts amounted to godly numbers because... And
there was an expression called complete games.
Yeah, well, that lasted into the 1970s until the day. Well, you know, Clem LeBline, I had the author of Clem LeBline on. He was really the first one. The Dodgers tinkered around, and then the Yankees followed with Casey Stengel in the 50s about a reliever. But if you ask people like Fritz Peterson or Jim Palmer or any of these guys before the 70s, they used to go 9 innings. Their careers were dead by the time they were 33, 34 with their arm shot. Now if they go 6 innings... it's a miracle. You know, you had Goose Gossage coming in, and Kansas City had, what's his name?
Fingers and all those guys.
Fingers.
Eckersley. Big difference between then and now. Hey, we're up against the time. I'm going to edit this with the interview we did last week. So if you're listening to this, hang right in there. You get a little bump of music. And coming up will be Ian and I talking about Ted Williams. So this is a very special episode, as well as being special because you and I agreed that, in essence, that we're going to bring you into the network. And I'm so excited about your upcoming show, and we're going to get it going within the next week. So
yeah, it's going to be good.
Ian, welcome to the network. It's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I am very honored to have you. And
it's an honor to be here, sir.
As well. Thank you again. And to all you out there, listen for the interview that we did earlier in the week, coming right up after this. And we'll talk soon, Ian. You have a wonderful day.
You too, sir.
And you out there, listen up. More to come. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko. The guest is Ian Kahanowitz. I got a hard time. You understand. I'm a Tikachinsky. So we'll catch you next time. Thank you very much for a great morning. All right, folks, there it is. I am back, and you are flying high with me, the Zigzag Man, over the zone in Alameda, California, a Comfortably Zoned network production. I'm across the bay from San Francisco in the northern part of California. And I'm joined by an East Coaster. This intrigues me. Ian Kahanowitz, Brooklyn, New York, a Yankee maven living in Massachusetts. Wow.
Yeah.
How are you?
I said that I'm doing great. I like it. The Zigzag Man. I am
the man of Zig. And
All the West Coast. I love the West Coast, because if you go back to the 60s and you go to the rock and roll scene, man, everybody up on Hyde Street in San Francisco, that's where the players were. The East Coast were like Springsteen.
Well, I was out here in the Summer of Love, those years, stationed out here in the Air Force. But I, like you, I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in Queens, and my family's in Brooklyn and was in Brooklyn. And it's just I lived half my life, the first 20 years in New York. I was forced out here and stayed out here. But it was tough being a sports fan back then. If you're a New York fan and you're living in California, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have any of the websites. Nothing. It's very difficult to follow one's team. You grew up in Brooklyn.
I did. I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to public school 206. I went to Cunningham Junior High School. I went to James Madison High School, the same high school Joe Torre and Bernie Sanders and Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg went to. And I went to Brooklyn College. And then I made law school up in Massachusetts. And I made Massachusetts my home. But I kept the Yankees as my team.
Yeah, wow. When you grew up in Brooklyn, the Dodgers, I'm assuming, you're not an old geese like me, I grew up, the Dodgers and Giants were in New York. And when you grew up in Brooklyn, they had gone.
They had gone. They had left in 58, both of them, after the 57 season. I was born in 70, so most of my wranglings were between the Mets and the Yankees, but like my father and all my uncles used to tell me about the old times when there was 3 teams there, and I got to see Ebbets Field Wall, which is about 15 minutes from my mother's place in Brooklyn. And, the Brooklyn Dodgers history is still prevalent. I mean, I leave New York and now I got a hockey team. My Islanders moved to Brooklyn. They got a basketball team, the Nets. And they got the Mets farm team, the Coney Island Cyclones.
Yeah, the Brooklyn Cyclones, which is a beautiful little setting. And I've been there. Kings, I think it's called Kings something Stadium, Kings Point Stadium, or what. And I made a visit back about 12 years ago and got to enjoy a game at the stadium. And it's like a throwback in a way. Baseball, you look over the field, it says Carl Erskine Place, right? This, that, and the other thing. Brooklyn, we were talking about that last night on the Dodgers show. Peter Trunk and I host a Brooklyn Dodgers, A Tale of Two Cities show. And we were talking how not just the move itself being a selfish one, and O'Malley was leading the league in attendance, not in revenue, and making big bucks, and didn't need to force the issue. It was all greed. He was a horrible person. But as a result, it really broke the heart of a city because they lost both the Giants and the Dodgers, but in particular Brooklyn, because that borough was so dependent in image and mindset on the Dodgers, and it just destroyed the heart of young sports fans like myself. I was 10 years old. My team left. Stay, the old Polo Grounds. And Peter was a Dodger fan growing up, and we were just talking how it ruined our spirit for a long time. Now, when the Mets came in, you had been following the Yankees. You'd been a Yankee fan all your life, I'm assuming.
I have.
Did the Mets challenge you for affection or for loyalty in any way? Did they win your heart?
The Mets never, it's funny. It's almost like a street thing, almost like that same kind of hatred that when you're a Giants fan or a Dodger fan, you hate each other, and then you hate the people across the river in the Bronx in the American League. For me, all those things, the Polo Grounds, Yankee Stadium, Ebbets Field. Again, if you were a Dodgers fan or a Giants fan, your allegiances went to the Mets. So you still had that same kind of hatred against the Yankees. They all told me, well, from 57 through 62, no one watched baseball in New York if you were a Dodger or a Giants fan because you hated the Yankees so much. And then
you hated them, but you had to worship them. You knew you were watching the most incredible dynasty, 2 or 3 dynasties in my lifetime with the Yankees, from 49 to 53, and then they were out of it a few years, and then 56 to 62 or 3. They were unbelievably great, and to say nothing of the Reggie Jackson Yankees. So you hate them, but you end up begrudgingly worshiping them. And,
they were elite. That's the thing. They were elite, Ralph, but think of it this way. I mean, you go back to 51, right? I mean, the shot heard around the world by Bobby Thompson gets the New York Giants into the World Series against the already 2-time world champions in a row, New York Yankees. So, I mean, you're going from playing the Dodgers and being behind so much, and now you just faced a fierce opponent, but now you're facing, like, Zeus, the king of the gods in the World Series.
Absolutely. And I want to note something about that 51 series. First of all, the person that really broke the back of the Giants in that series was Gil McDougall, who I consider to be among the 3 best utility infielders that ever lived. And he became one of my favorite players, and he was a Yankee. And it was after, because 51 was my first year going out to those 3 ballparks. My grandfather took me when I'm a little kid. And the irony of me loving and worshiping him over the years as a player, a man crush, if you will, stood with me. And that was the World Series when, because in the playoffs Don Mueller had broken his ankle or sprained it severely, they moved Hank Thompson to right. They had Willie Mays in center, and they had Monty Irvin in left. Now, the significance of that was it was the first time in the history of baseball when there were 3 blacks playing in the same outfield, let alone a World Series. So that sticks in my mind. Giants lost that to the Yankees. I was happy to be in. There's a big controversy about whether Bobby Thompson knew what the pitch was coming after all these years. I believe he did. There was a wonderful book, The Cathedral Green, written by a Wall Street Journal author. And he pretty much laid it out there with extensive interviews that the pitch that Branca threw, the fastball, Bobby Thompson had knowledge that he was going to be a fastball. The way it was done, Herman Franks had a telescope up in the center field clubhouse, and Dodgers weren't changing the signs, and they'd find out what pitch was going to be thrown. And they had an elaborate buzzer signal thing through Sal Evars and some guys, and they had it going all through July when they made that August, they made that miracle comeback. They were far, far behind, and they had the system going, and they just took over. And but it was done through something that wasn't illegal at the time. stealing signs was you could do it any way you wanted to do it. Just became a moral issue. But that was my first year as a baseball fan, and that was I got to see the Giants in the Polo Grounds before Willie was called up, and when they configured the team after Willie was called up. And my grandfather sat there, Phil Niss, rest in peace, my pop. And he'd explain the history of the game and Frankie Frisch and take two and hit to right. And it was just a wonderful education, and it stuck with me, and I loved it. Now, I got to ask you how you came to leave New York City and go to Massachusetts.
Oh, for me, I had made a law school up here, and I was a poor boy from Brooklyn, and the law school was a little more affordable than the other big law schools. And so I left Brooklyn back on August 14th, 1993. I was 23 years old. And I came up here, and it shocked me. It shocked me two ways, because, number one, I went to a small town named Andover where my law school was, and it was just like totally opposite from where I grew up from, a town of 20,000. It's rural. There's all trees around. But that was the first shock. The second shock is I did not realize how depressing at the time, because this is way before the Red Sox were winning World Series again, how depressing the sports were up here. The Patriots were horrible. They were rebuilding with Bill Parcells. The Red Sox were horrible. The Bruins haven't won in years. And, the 80s had left the Celtics, and the Celtics were just a mediocre team. But it was the Red Sox. Every time I went, and I'm like, into a bar, and I used to ask people, hey, where were you when Mike Torres served up that pitch to Bucky Dent? These people looked like they were going to kill me.
Right.
I'm like,
just as much a feverish rivalry between the Yankees and the Red Sox as there was and still is between the Dodgers and the Giants. And that's another story, how the Dodgers and Giants carried on the rivalry when they moved to the West Coast. But that's a great story. Yeah, the look in their eye. You don't joke about that. I'd see somebody with a Red Sox cap once in a while say, "Are you Bucky Dent?"
Yeah. They took, when they won the World Series, my wife is from here, and she's a Red Sox fan. I live 10 minutes from Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play, so all my kids are Patriots fans. They can't understand how I'm a Giants fan. I missed the first Super Bowl when the Giants beat the New England Patriots because my kids, I had twins. They were 3 months old. I couldn't stay up. I had to go for a night feeding. I turned on the tube. I said to my son, he's an infant. I said, let's see how bad the Giants lost. And it's like post-mortem. I'm like, oh, my God, I missed the best Super Bowl ever. And he's a huge Patriots fan now. But with the Red Sox, there are no, and this is what I'll tell you about living in New England, there are no more dedicated and well-educated fans than New England fans on their sports. When the Red Sox won, people visited their grandparents, like you were talking about your grandfather, and actually spoke to the grave sites and put a ball saying the Red Sox finally won. These people were waiting their whole lives. And they had great
it's equivalent to with the Cubs, except that there was no one with the Cubs. There was no one on the face of the earth that saw them win in, 1908. 1908. No one was left. But it was as close an analogy as can possibly be from that standpoint. Celebration, they went nuts. I want to ask you about the legend of Ted Williams and his last day. There was an essay written by John Updike, who happened to be one of my favorite authors. He wrote Rabbit Run. When I was growing up, he taught a person how to go through adolescence. He taught a young man he taught a young person what a middle-aged guy goes through and what goes through their head and and their goals and aspirations. A wonderful writer, and he wrote about Ted Williams' last day that he went out with a home run, didn't tip his cap. So much is written about Williams over the years, so much written about DiMaggio and stuff. I want to know, is there anything from your years living in Massachusetts that you picked up on Williams that people don't know about? For instance, something that you can tell my listeners that that they would have no way of knowing under any other circumstances. I'm just pulling this question out of my ear in a way, but what do you?
I'll address it.
You're in the community.
Yeah, number one, I'll give you a few things that people don't know. Number one, Teddy, they call him Teddy Ballgame up here. The Splendid Splinter, you all know. People themselves, fans of the Red Sox, love Ted Williams. And they love Ted Williams because not only was he a purist player, but he lost 7 years to World War II as a fighter pilot, and then Korea. And so not only is he a baseball hero up here, but he is also an American hero up here. And had he had not lost 7 years of his baseball life, chances are he might have had the home run record, and he probably would have had the batting average record. I mean, I think he retired with a 344 average.
Right.
And again, so another thing people don't know about is that he was brought up in San Diego, and he was part Mexican. And that stigma, because he grew up in a time, I think he was born in 1914, where minorities, were shunned upon, whether it was Mexicans or Africans.
Could have been last Thursday you were talking about, but that's another story. His mother worked for the Salvation Army, and I don't think his dad was in the picture.
No, and he grew up with this stigma, but he trained himself. He trained himself to be. His self-proclamation was, I was the best hitter in the game. He would never say I was the best all-around player in the game. He would say when it came to hitting, he was the king. He always said Joe DiMaggio was the best all-around player, but he got hitting down to a science. He wrote a book, The Science of Hitting, back in the 1960s.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he wrote a book. And I think with Ted, he was a great hitter. And you know something? When he coached Washington and Texas, he wasn't much of that kind of authoritarian figure which can keep egos in check. He was more concentrated on what he knew best, which was hitting. I think that's what people should bring out of Ted Williams. Now, when you talk about the last play on the last day, you have to start with the Boston press up here, with the whole tip of the cap.
They hated him. What was the cause of that rift? There was one sports writer in particular that started it. Was it the holdout early on? Was it he wouldn't wear a tie? He was his own man, but what caused the rift initially between Ted and the press?
The whole rift was with Ted was the press was even more ferocious in the 1940s and 50s up here than they were in New York. They weren't, you see the New York press when the Beatles step off the plane and they're joking around with the Beatles and they're throwing all these questions. Up here, the press was literally trying to find skeletons in everyone's closets. And every time Ted Williams had a good game, he had his 406 season, they always compared him to DiMaggio. Saying, you didn't have a 56-game hitting streak, or he didn't win a World Series. And, said he just got so tired of answering to the press, he stopped talking to the press. And with the press, people and fans thought he was just snubbing the fans. He wasn't. He just could not stand the press. The press was ruthless. They almost ruined Carlton Fisk's career when he made statements about his teammates when he was a rookie. And the press was almost like the National Enquirer up here. They would bend things. They would twist things to make a story. Big was made in the last shot. Ted Williams hits a home run. Everyone's like, go tip your cap. He would not give the press that satisfaction of seeing him tip the cap.
It wasn't so much the fans, it was the press.
It was the press because the fans loved him. How couldn't you love a guy that kept you? Yeah, how couldn't you?
He was like John Wayne come to life. He's the real hero. He, like John, played one, and he was that. He was a lot of things. He was also flawed. He was a difficult, complicated teammate.
He was
to get along with. He can't. I'm not going to diagnose him as being bipolar, but people who have written books about him have alluded to that. And he was also a loner. He had this the skill of being a fly fisherman. He was had a big contract with Sears as a fisherman, and he'd spend weeks and weeks out in Florida and just fishing away his summers. He must have been an incredible guy. Can I say something about the fans themselves, the people in Boston?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
How they treated Bill Russell, for instance. It was akin to how the fans treated Willie Mays out here. They wouldn't let Mays buy a house in a neighborhood that he wanted to buy a house in. But with Russell, and just going by what I read in a book by Terry Pluto, I think it was called, he wrote a few, one about the NBA and one about the ABA, and it was Lost Balls or something like that. But he gets into how fans would break into Russell's house, defecate in his bed. There was the area of Massachusetts, Boston. I don't know how it is now. Other players over the years, they didn't integrate till 1959 with Pumpsie Green. The troubles that Jim Rice went through and Harper went through, horrible. Boston had the chance to sign Jackie Robinson and Willie Mays at one time. They were at tryout camps, and folks like Joe Cronin and Pinky Higgins and those racist pigs at that time saw fit not to sign those gentlemen because of the color of their skin. Have things, because I've never even been to Boston, I'm saying these things from California, have things changed over the years? Is it still, is there still an underlining racist attitude in Boston, or have things come together a little bit more than in the past?
I think social prejudice exists everywhere. Now what's odd about Massachusetts is that we're labeled as one of the most liberal states in the union. They'll always vote Democrat. And what's odd about it is like you said, with Pumpsie Green, they were the last team to integrate, besides the Yankees. Elston Howard came up, I think, in 55, and Pumpsie Green came in 59, like you said. Bill Russell was up here at a very, 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 very turbulent time in Massachusetts. At that time, I think Massachusetts should have been a southern state because you had prejudices against Catholics. You had prejudices against the Jews, and especially, African Americans living here. Bill Russell, today he's seen as a hero. He won 11 championships in 12 years.
Oh, they cheer for him at the arena, which
right
is
but don't go,
even back
don't
then.
Go living in,
yeah, but exactly.
Don't go living in my neighborhood, though.
Right.
All right, to go down to the garden to see you like that. Now, I think attitudes changed in the mid-'80s. Rice was still on the team. He had to go through a fair amount of this racial setback. But if you recall, in '76, there was a famous photograph that was taken in Faneuil Hall, which is right downtown in Boston. There was a rice riot going on, and you see a white man taking off the flagpole and trying to impale a black man with the flagpole. That kind of prejudice, it was almost like no busing, no kids. It was segregated. But I think this whole thing, I think it could be seen with Big Papi this year, the kind of love. He never had all these, Boston never had a player like Big Papi that you go out and, you're hitting 300 like Ted Williams did. There was never any racial things about Big Papi, and I think that it was almost like osmosis that the whole state changed in the mid-'80s to early '90s when I got up here.
Nice that it is changed.
But look at Bill Buckner.
It's a horrible history, and we all, whatever state you're from, whatever region, there's good, bad, and indifferent. You have to look at it this way. I think television and the internet has brought us together as a country a little bit, in some sense. This recent election notwithstanding, in terms of the craziness that I see going on. But that's for another show. I want to ask you this. What was the biggest adjustment that you had to make when you moved, personally, moving to Massachusetts from, I assume you moved directly from Brooklyn?
I did. I moved directly from Brooklyn. My family and friends.
And it was your law school years. Was there an adjustment in dealing with people for yourself? You were going to law school, and but even students. I'm just curious because I know what a New York neighborhood is like, and I wonder what your rhetoric was like in Massachusetts early on.
What I realized was when I came up here, that even after 24 years, I'm coming up on 24 years living in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I still stick out like a sore thumb because I think Boston, if you're in a big city, like Boston, people are more vocal. But I live way in the sticks where people are conservative. They don't tell it to your face. They're not like in New York where everything is going at 100 miles an hour. I mean, I live now, I own part of a lake, I own part of a river. My nearest neighbor is about a mile away. And, that's coming from a kid who had 1,300 people in his building and about 28,000 people on his block. So I live in the middle of nowhere. But, you go to a bar and you try to get friendly with people, and they're looking at you like, it's like, who are you? Where did you come from? We're not that loud. We're not that friendly. New Englanders are cold until they get to know you. It's not like going into Midtown Manhattan and just like, start hanging out with a bunch of people and you feel like you've hung out with them forever. People.
Right. That's the New York spirit that I'm talking about. What must that have been like for you in Massachusetts, not having that, being vocal, being a conversationalist, all that?
Well, it was hard to get chicks. It was hard to get girls, I mean, they didn't want that type. They didn't want that type. They wanted someone who, came from a home with a white picket fence, and they didn't want someone with a flawed history whose parents are divorced, who came from utter poverty in Brooklyn, who's a New Yorker that, the state frowns upon because they say, oh, New Yorkers are obnoxious, they're loud, they're rude, they're ignorant. People in Maine.
You rang?
What was that?
You rang?
Yeah, exactly. Like Lurch. You're right. But, people in Maine, Massachusetts used to own Maine. There's prejudice against Maine people up here that they're dumb. Rhode Islanders are the worst drivers in the state. So, people in Massachusetts frown upon that. But they hold a lot of prejudices. And when you try to hang out with them, you got to go back to a level you've never seen before. It's just not, bars close up at 12. They're not open all night. You end up in a diner, half blitzed out of your mind. You're 20, 21 years old. Things close up. The blue laws are still in place in most towns. The towns pack up at a certain time. In New York, you can go get a deli sandwich any time of the night. It was a huge change. It was a huge change. The people are more conservative. They're a lot more snobbier up here,
And yet you stuck it out.
I did stick it out. You know why? Because I liked the New England area, and that's not only Massachusetts. I love Newport, and I love Rhode Island. I love Connecticut. I love Vermont. I love New Hampshire, and I love Maine. And wherever you go, what New York doesn't have is all these minor league teams that are all around here. Plus
I
college
love minor
football.
league ball, yes.
Pawtucket Red Sox, 10 minutes from my house. The Maine Red Sox.
Farm club and have been for years.
Yeah.
Nice.
And you don't see that. And there's a lot of attention paid to college football, whereas in New York City, you really didn't get that because, you didn't have a lot of college football. Here you have Boston College. You got, UConn, which is about an hour, which has a good basketball program. Providence. Friars are always in the top 64 when they're going for the Final Four. There's a lot of good things in New England that you got to go scope out that New York didn't have.
Well, you got my cousin living there, Jimmy Niss, and I'll put you with him someday. He's a music maven, and you'll enjoy his company. We were supposed to talk about Ty Cobb today. See, I try to learn something, but now I already have learned. So you want to put Ty Cobb off for another time when you come back and visit?
I'll tell you what, Ty Cobb's going to take up a whole show. Because
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we'll put off Ty for another time.
I know, and let's consider this just the time that we got to know each other a little bit, and I got to appreciate your passion. And but by all means, you got to come back soon because
that's the good thing about being with a busted leg. I can come back any day.
Beautiful. We'll do a follow-up in the next couple of weeks, and that would be my privilege to be able to get to know you even more and to learn something. And just to give you a preparation, when I grew up, there was the argument, was Ty Cobb the greatest of all, or was Babe Ruth the greatest of all? And the only knowledge I got about Ty Cobb as a kid growing up, the only reading material was a book written by a fellow by the name of Al Stump, and he wrote a biography of Cobb, and he got to travel with him in his later years after he retired. And I want to know when next we talk about how much of that biography was accurate and what you know to be what you could tell us about Cobb that I didn't learn or we all haven't learned from that Al Stump biography. So we'll have him to talk about what a character. I just read a quote by Tris Speaker. He said about Cobb is still living the Civil War. To him, we're all a bunch of damn Yankees. I thought that was a great...
That is, and it was a true statement because, again, and we'll get into it, Cobb was a Southerner who went to the Detroit Tigers, Northern team.
Right.
And
that's another thing that interests me, the history of Detroit. I have shows on the Giants, on the Dodgers, on this network. Don't have anything on Detroit and what a history they've had over the years. When I grew up, it was Paul Maxwell beating the Yankees on Sundays. So in the years where they had K-Line and before that, K-Line.
Yeah, that was the 60s. Yeah. And
yes.
I know you're on a few of my Facebook pages. You're in my Ty Cobb one. You're in the dugout, I think. The dugout is huge. It has like 9,000 people. And I think you're in my broadcasting one. Aren't you in my broadcasting one?
I'm in the broadcasting one. I don't know about the dugout one. I'd love...
You could just go apply to it because I have a Tiger one as well. And I need a lot of help with that page. I got a Dodger one as well. It's called From Brooklyn to Los Angeles, and there's a lot of love in there. I got probably what people tell me is, and this could be for another show, is a Negro League one. And I got all the people from the Negro League museums in there. I got people who are descendants of famous ball players who played in the Negro Leagues. And I think, like Ty Cobb, you go to Ty Cobb every day and you learn something. You got Cindy Cobb in there, who's the granddaughter of Ty Cobb. You got Herschel Cobb, who's the grandson of Ty Cobb. And you got Charles Learson, who wrote a new book on Cobb. And everyone loves those sites. And I think for teaching about baseball, you got the Negro League sites. You got, the Ty Cobb, the history of the Tigers and the Dodgers. And the Yankees, I got a history one, and they all have about 3,000 people in about each one of them.
Beautiful. I hope you will, when you get off this interview, send me links to those, the Dugout one and the Ty Cobb one on my Facebook and my personal Facebook, and I will incorporate them into what I'm doing here. And as we talked about, I'd love you to come on to the network, and as you mentioned, the Negro League, that would be a wonderful podcast, the history of the Negro League. And for those out there, that's what the Negro Leagues were called. They weren't called the Black Leagues or anything. So when we refer to them, it's not a slur by any means. And as a matter of fact, the Negro Leagues died when Jackie Robinson, soon after Jackie Robinson broke the color line. And that was one of the biggest industries, black industries, going. And in a way, it was his crossing the line ended up being detrimental to a big black industry, and that's an interesting story as well. Saw an interesting picture of Ty Cobb talking to Jackie Robinson on Facebook somewhere, which couldn't imagine them sitting in the same room. So that's what we're going to learn about the real Ty Cobb next time you're back.
That sounds great, Ralph. I love it.
Beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this to some extent because you do so many of these things. You have such a long history in broadcasting and communicating. So I hope I didn't disappoint you.
No, this is what it's all about, man. You asking the right questions, and all your listeners get to learn something new. And, it's not just going to an ESPN and seeing the same broadcast 4 times a day. it's something that somebody wants to plug into here and listen to. Someone who wants to get educated about a Ty Cobb or a Ted Williams or, whatever Zigzag's putting on the radio today, because that's what it's about. It's well, it's true. It's the alternative stuff to doing what Major League Baseball is controlling and brainwashing you with.
Absolutely. We have no sponsors telling us what to say. We have no front office people calling and saying, well, if you say something like that about our team, I'm going to arrange it that the players won't come on and this, that, and the other thing. That's almost passé. That's one of the beauties of living long enough to see the change in how people get their news and how podcasters have gained respect, how bloggers have gained respect. It's a nice evolution along the way, and it's a privilege for me to be a part of it, and it's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the guest was, and I do want to pronounce it correctly, so I'm going to have you do it. You told me how to do it.
That's the beauty of my name. It's Ian Kahanowitz. You're not the only one who has issues. All my teachers in school, and I went to school a long time, had them.
Right. Well, my father had my name of Tikachinsky changed when I was in kindergarten, and I'm just learning that I wasn't the only person. There are other people, when they were kids, had the same problem, and I'm sorry he had it shortened for his sake and the families, but that's the way it goes. We are what we are. Thank you, Ian. We'll be in touch, and certainly you'll be back within the next couple of weeks, and we'll talk about Ty Cobb.
Awesome. I look forward to it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ian, and everybody out there. I'm going to end the segment the way I do most. I'm going to implore Ian and everybody out there to keep your humor dry, keep your dreams wet, keep your kids out of military recruiting stations. You don't want your kids being fodder, and your grandkids too. And while we're on the subject of kids, keep your children off the laps of clerics that wear dresses just to be on the safe side. You never know. Thank you, Ian. We'll catch you on the flip-flop.
All right. Take care now.
See ya.